Hello everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare FM. In this video, I'll be narrating some of the scariest and most disturbing stories designed to send a shiver down your spine. Before we dive in, leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, put on your headphones, turn off the lights, and let's begin. My girlfriend talks in her sleep. She's been saying the most horrible things recently. I'm infatuated with her. Utterly infatuated. And it wasn't at a healthy level. Far from it. I would think about her every moment she was away. I would sometimes sit on my couch and just stare at my phone waiting for her to text. I'd tell myself, don't contact her, don't. It will come off as too strong. But then I'd still find myself clicking her name on my contact list before my inner voice would continue. You don't want her to know how desperately smitten you are with her. It's unattractive. It will scare her off. No, you must wait for her to call you this time. But it was excruciating and exhausting. Almost unbearable. I once heard that the ancient Greeks believed that falling madly and irrationally in love with somebody was a curse that you would wish upon your enemies. I could never understand what they meant. After all, isn't falling head over heels in love the ultimate goal nowadays? But now that it's happened to me, I have to say, the ancient Greeks were right. This is a curse. I was barely in control of myself. Almost as though my infatuation with her had possessed me. The two of us were sexually active together, but still in the dating phase. We were at that make or break era of a blossoming relationship where we'd either have the talk and formally be in a relationship, or we'd start to slowly drift apart. The latter of which I don't think I'd be able to cope with. Honestly, I wouldn't be able to. Almost everything about her captivated me. The way she held her hand over her mouth when she laughed, how she'd caress the pendant of her necklace when she was frightened, how she'd twirl her hair in her finger when she was excited. All of it. Her smell, her smile, her eyes. Yeah, I know. It probably makes you sick reading about it. I feel the same way. I was never the hopeless romantic type, but now I can't stop fantasizing about her. I think about us doing the long 3-hour hike up to that magnificent view from one of our first dates, to that first kiss as we overlooked the lights of the city. But this time, I'd get down on one knee, bring out the ring, and, well, you know what would happen next. All right, fine, I'll stop. Yes, this is a girl I'd only been casually dating for a couple of months. I shouldn't be thinking about proposing yet. I know that. I'm just barely able to control myself any longer. I feel as though I'm losing power over the decisions I make. And that brings me to why I'm here writing this out at the moment. It started with the first real thing that troubled me about her. We'd never actually spent a night together. No matter how late she was over, once either of us showed signs of being tired, she'd up and leave. She wouldn't leave awkwardly or in anger. Just a casual kiss goodnight, a smile, and a call me soon. It was something I didn't really even notice the first few times she did it. But after almost 8 weeks of dating, it was becoming strange. I'd have to ask her about it. It took drinking almost an entire bottle of wine before I had the courage to do it. She looked almost defeated when I asked and lowered her eyes in embarrassment. I knew this talk would come eventually, she started. She took in a deep breath with a long, drawn-out exhale. Recently, she paused again, I've started talking in my sleep. She shook her head in embarrassment. It's called somniloquy. I looked it up. I shrugged and laughed out loud. My demeanor seemed to say, that's it? No, Stephen. Listen, she said. She wasn't laughing. It's bad. It's completely out of control. It's not just random words or gibberish. No, it's horrible. I say horrible, disgusting things. She was starting to raise her voice, breathing heavy and tearing up. I approached her and held her. I told her it couldn't be that bad. I told her to spend the night. I told her she was probably exaggerating. I was wrong. That night she stayed at my house, but she warned me of something before falling asleep. Whatever you do, don't wake me up. It makes me really scared and disoriented if that happens. And don't respond to me, just ignore it. I nodded and agreed. If it becomes too much, she continued, just leave the room and sleep on the couch. I won't mind. I told her not to worry about it. I told her that it wouldn't be a big deal. I told her I wouldn't leave for the couch. I'd stay beside her in the bed. But I was wrong. I couldn't even last one night. We both fell asleep without incident. I don't know how many hours passed, but I woke up in the dark with the sensation that someone was watching me. And then I remembered, she was with me. She was actually spending the night. I smiled, but then I noticed the shadowy outline of her sitting up on the bed. She was looking down at me, staring. It creeped me out. I'll admit it. Her posture was entirely different. It was as though it wasn't even her at all. Then she spoke. It wasn't her voice that I heard. It was much lower and gravelly, like something out of a horror movie. "I'll chew the skin from your bones," she said. I froze. At first, I just kept looking at her. This was not at all what I expected. I thought it would be more like the way Tourette's is often portrayed, just random swearing and shouting. I honestly thought to myself, what will I do if she attacks me right now? What if she really does try to chew the skin from my bones? But then she just lay down and went back to sleep. I was creeped out. I tried to lie back down and ignore her, but struggled. I couldn't even close my eyes without thinking, maybe she's sitting up again and staring at me. And then one time I rolled over to look at her, and she was. Her face was pressed right towards mine. Her breath was foul and rotted, something that was most certainly not normal for her. She spoke again in the same voice as before. "If you don't move to the couch, you'll be dead by morning." That did it for me. I sat up in a moment and headed for the living room. She made some sort of wheezing sound as I left. I think it was supposed to be laughter. I was lying on the couch, but I wasn't going to be able to fall back to sleep. I was far too shaken. I was staring out towards the window, hoping to see the first few hints of the sun rising. And then I thought I heard something. From the bedroom, I listened, and then I heard it again. "Stephen." It was that same low and gravelly voice. It sounded like a witch. I tried to just ignore it at first, but then it continued. "Stephen." Still, I said nothing. "I know you can hear me, Stephen. You're awake now. Why don't you come back into the bedroom?" The voice barely sounded human. "Or maybe you'd prefer if I come to you?" I still didn't say anything. I was told not to, but I listened. If I heard her start walking towards the bedroom door, I'm not even joking, I would have run right out of the apartment. But she had asked me not to respond to her sleep talking, so I didn't. And then I heard her once more. "Sorry if this spoils your plans," she began laughing. "The two of you were supposed to walk that trail again," she started. I wasn't even remotely prepared for what she'd say next. "You'd both be so tired when you'd reach the top. You'd look over the city, then you'll get on one knee and bring out the ring." She began laughing. And that's when I realized this wasn't just a problem with sleep talking. It was something much more, something supernatural. I had never told anybody about my proposal fantasy. There was simply no way she could have known about any of it. This was no longer about merely talking in one's sleep. This was about possession. I can't go back into the bedroom. I have no idea what would happen if I did. Instead, I'm going to wait it out, hold up in my living room until the sun rises. I have a couple more hours yet. I can hear her laughing occasionally in the bedroom. It's still not her voice. Still that same low-pitched cackle. But as I sit on my couch writing this out, here's what scares me the most. Maybe my infatuation and utter obsession with her wasn't normal. I said before that I felt like I was losing control of myself. More so, I believe, than the typical falling in love story. No. I fear that the infatuation I felt was the entity slowly taking control of me. Of it controlling my thoughts, fears, ambitions, and anxieties. Maybe once I become completely absorbed, a transfer would occur, and she would be free of it. I know I should leave. That I should open the front door, get in my car, and drive away from here. But I can't. I can't leave her. I've already lost control. I'm infatuated with her. Utterly infatuated. Every night, no matter the weather, something walks down our street whistling softly. You can only hear it if you're in the living room or the kitchen when they walk by, and it always starts at exactly 3:03. The sound starts faint somewhere near the beginning of the lane near the Carson place. We're towards the middle of the street, so the whistling moves past us before fading away in the direction of the cul-de-sac. When I was younger, my sister and I would sneak into the kitchen some nights to listen. Mom and Dad didn't like that, and we'd catch heck if they found us out there, but they were never too hard on us since we always stuck to the one big rule. Don't try to look at whatever was whistling. My neighborhood is a funny place. I've lived here since I was 6 and I love it. The houses are small, but well-kept, good-sized yards, plenty of places to roam. There are a lot of other kids here my age. I turned 13 back in October. We grew up together and would always play foursquare in the cul-de-sac or roam around from back porch to back porch in the summer. This was a good place to grow up. I'm old enough to see it. And there's only the two strange things here, the night whistling and the good luck. The whistling never bothered me much. Like I said, I couldn't even hear it from my bedroom. But Mom and Dad don't like talking about it, so I've stopped asking questions. My dad is a strong guy, tall and calm. He has an accent since he moved to the US as a kid. His family, my grandparents, they're from the islands. That's what they call it. My dad, the only time he isn't so calm is if the whistler comes up. He talks a little quicker then, eyes move faster, and he tells us not to think about it so much. And to always remember the one rule, the big rule. Don't try to look outside when the whistler goes past. Not that we could look even if we wanted. See, there are shutters on the inside of every window, thick pieces of heavy canvas that pull down from the top and latch to the bottom of the window frame. Each latch even has a small lock about the size of what you'd find on a diary. My dad locks those shutters every night before we all go to bed and keeps the key in his room. My mom, I don't know what she thinks about the whistling. I've seen her out in the living room before at 3:03 when the sound starts. I could see her if I cracked my door open just an inch to peek. She's not out there often, at least I haven't caught her much, but once or twice a month I think she sits out there on our big red couch just listening. The whistler has the same tune every night. It's cheerful, da-da-da-da-da-dum, da-da-da-da-da-dum. Remember how I said there are two odd things about where I live? Well, besides our night whistler, everyone in my neighborhood is really lucky. It's hard to explain, and Dad doesn't like us talking about this part much either. But good things just seem to happen to people around here a lot. Usually it's small things, winning a radio contest, or getting an unexpected promotion at work, or finding some arrowheads buried in the yard, the authentic kind. The weather's pretty good, and there's no crime, and everybody's gardens bloom extra bright in the fall. A million little blessings, I've heard my mom say about living here. But the main reason we stay here, why we moved here in the first place, is my sister Nola. She was born very sick, something with her lungs. We couldn't even bring her home when she was born, only visit her in the hospital. She was so small, I remember. Small even compared to the other babies. A machine had to breathe for her. We moved into our house here to be closer to the hospital. As soon as we moved here, Nola started getting better. The doctors couldn't figure it out. They chalked it up to whatever they were doing, but we all could tell they were confused. But my parents knew, even I knew, Nola getting better was just another of the million little blessings we got for living in our neighborhood. So that's why we stayed even after we found out that for every small miracle that happens here every day, now and then, some bad things happen. But they only happen if you look for the whistler. See, our neighborhood has a welcoming committee. They show up with macaroni casserole and a gift basket and a manila folder whenever someone new moves in. They're very friendly. 4 people showed up when we moved in 7 years ago. The committee made small talk, gave me a Snickers bar, and took turns holding Nola. It was her first week out of the hospital, so they were extra careful. Then the committee asked to speak to my parents in private, so I was sent to my room where I still managed to hear nearly every word. The welcoming committee told my parents about how nice the neighborhood was, really exceptionally, hard to explain kind of nice. And then they told my parents about the even harder to explain whistling that happened every morning at 3:03 and ended at the tick of 3:05. The group, our new neighbors, warned my parents that the whistling was quiet, would never harm or hurt us as long as we didn't look for what was making the sound. This part they stressed, and I pushed my ear into the door, straining to hear them. People who went looking for the whistler had their luck change, sometimes tragically. A black cloud would hang over anyone that looked. Anything that could go wrong would. The manila envelope the committee brought over contained newspaper clippings, stories about car crashes and ruined lives, public deaths and freak accidents. Not everyone dies, I heard the head of the committee tell my dad, but the life goes out of them. Even if they live, there's no light in them ever again, no presence. My mom, I could tell she wasn't taking it seriously. She kept asking if this was some prank they play on new neighbors. At one point, my mom got angry, accused the committee of trying to scare us out of our new home, asked them if they were racist on account of my dad being from the islands. My dad calmed her down, told her he could tell our new neighbors were sincere and they were just trying to help us. He explained that he grew up hearing these kinds of stories from his mom, and that he knew there were strange things that walked among us. Some of those strange things were good and some were bad, but most were just different. After the committee left, Dad went out to the hardware store, bought the canvas blinds, the latches, and the locks, and installed them on every window in the house after dinner. That first night in our new house, I crept out of my room at 3 a.m. only to find my dad awake sitting on the living room couch, holding my baby sister. My dad held up his finger in a shh motion, but patted the couch next to him. I sat and we waited. At exactly 3:03, we heard the whistling, da-da-da-da-da-dum, da-da-da-da-da-dum. It came and it went just like our neighbors said. The whistling returns each night and we never look, and we enjoy our million little blessings every day. Nola breathes on her own, and she's grown into a strong, clever girl. My dad even joined the welcoming committee. We don't get new neighbors often. Why would anyone want to leave? But when a new family moves in, my dad and the committee bring them macaroni casserole, a gift basket, and the manila folder. I can always tell by the look on my dad's face when he comes back if the family took the committee seriously, or if we'd be getting new neighbors again very soon. Not long ago, a family moved in across the street from us. The previous owner, Ms. Maddie, passed away at age 105. She'd lived a good, long life. Our new neighbors seemed like they'd fit in just fine. They believed the welcoming committee, took my dad's advice about the locking shutters since they had a young child of their own. Whatever newspaper clippings were in that manila envelope, whatever evidence, my dad never let us see. But I imagine it must have been awfully convincing since our neighbors got along with no issues for the first month. One night, when our new neighbors had to leave town, they sent their son, Holden, to stay with us. He was 12, a year under me in school. I didn't know him well before that night, but as soon as his parents dropped him off after dinner, I could tell it was going to be a bad time. "Do you know who is always out there whistling every night?" Holden asked the moment the adults left the room. The three of us were sitting in the den, some Disney movie playing idly on the television. My sister and I exchanged a glance. "We don't talk about that," I said. "I think it's that weirdo that lives in the big yellow house on the corner," Holden said. "Mr. Tolles?" my sister asked. "No way, he's really nice." Holden shrugged. "Must be a psycho killer then." Nola tensed. "We don't talk about it," I repeated. "Let's go in my room and play Nintendo." We spent the next few hours playing games, eating popcorn, and then watching movies. A typical sleepover, but I could see Holden was getting antsy. After my parents had wished us a good night, locked the blinds, and gone to bed, Holden stood up from his beanbag and walked over to where Nola and I were sitting on my bed. "Have you ever even tried looking?" he asked. "It's nearly time." Like most sleepovers, we'd conveniently ignored any suggestion of a bedtime. I was shocked to see he was right. It was almost 3 a.m. I sighed. "We don't... See, I can't even try to look because my dad locks the blinds every night and hides the key," he continued, ignoring me. "So does our dad," said Nola. "No," replied Holden. "No, he doesn't." "You saw him do it?" I said, a little sharper than I meant to sound. Holden grinned. "Your dad locks the blinds, yeah, but he doesn't hide the key. He keeps it right on his normal keychain." "So?" I asked, worried I already knew what he would say next. Because I had noticed that my dad didn't bother hiding the key anymore after all of these years, because he knew we took it seriously. "So, after your dad locked up, but before your parents went to bed, I went to the bathroom. And on my way, I may have peeked into their room, and I may have seen your dad's keychain on his nightstand, and I maybe went and borrowed the key to the blinds." Nola and I stared, and his grin only grew wider. "You're lying," I said. Holden shrugged. "You can check if you want. Just open your parents' door and look, you'll see his keychain right there on the nightstand." "Stay here," I told both of them. "Don't move a muscle." I hurried over to my parents' room but hesitated at the door. If Holden wasn't lying, my dad would be angry, beyond angry. I was scared thinking about it, but more scared of an open window with the whistler right outside. I opened the door, barely an inch, and looked in, but it was too dark to see. Taking a deep breath, I walked into the room. 2 steps into the dark, I froze. The whistling started, and I could hear it clearly, from my parents' room. I never realized, but they must have heard the sound every night since we moved into the house. They never told us. I don't think I could have slept through it. I stood there, listening to the whistling come closer. unsure whether I should turn on a light or call out for my dad. Soft sounds from the living room brought me back to reality. "Nola!" I yelled, running out of my parents' room. Holden and Nola were standing near the front door next to a window. Holden wasn't lying. I could see him fumbling with the lock on one of the blinds. I heard a click. He did have the key. Holden let out a quick laugh. Nola stood next to him, hunched up, afraid but maybe curious. The whistling was right outside our house now. I think I made a sound, called out. I can't remember. Time felt frozen, clock hands nailed to the face, but I found myself moving. I'm not fast, I've never been athletic. Somehow, though, I covered the space between myself and Nola in a moment. My eyes were locked on her, but I heard Holden pull the blind all the way down so it could release. I heard the snap of it start to raise, and I heard the whistling just on the other side of the window. But I had my arms around Nola, and I turned us so she was facing away from the window. At the same time, I jammed my eyes shut. The blind whipped open. The whistling stopped. I felt Nola shaking in my arms. "Don't look, okay?" I told her. "Don't turn around." We were positioned so that she was facing back towards the hallway and I was facing the window. My eyes were still closed. I felt her nod into my shoulder. I reached out with the arm not holding Nola and tried to touch Holden. My hand brushed against his arm. He was shaking worse than Nola. "Holden?" I asked. Silence. I reached past him and gingerly felt for the window, eyes still sealed shut. The glass was cold against my fingertips, colder than it should have been for the time of year. I moved my hand up the window, searching for the string to the blind. The glass began to get warmer the further I reached, and there was a gentle hum feeding back into my fingertips. I tried not to think about what might be on the other side of the window. Finally, I touched the string and yanked the blinds shut. I opened my eyes. In the dim light leaking out from the kitchen, I could make out Holden, pale and small, staring at the now closed window. "Holden?" I asked again. He turned towards me and he screamed. Everything became a flurry of motion. Lights sparked to life in the hall, then the living room. My parents' footsteps thudded across the hardwood floor. I didn't turn to look back at them. My eyes were glued to Holden. He was pale, had bit his lip so hard there was a thin red line of blood running down his chin, and he'd wet himself. "What happened?" my dad asked from behind me. I managed to swivel away from Holden and look back. He looked. I'd never seen my dad scared before, but I saw it that night, in that moment, an old, ugly terror stitched on his face, a parent's fear. "Just Holden?" he mouthed to me. I nodded yes. My dad let out a breath. He looked so relieved I nearly expected him to cheer, but then he turned to Holden and my dad's face changed. I wondered if he felt bad for feeling good that Holden was the only one that looked. There was a knock at the door. We all froze. Holden whimpered. "Don't answer it," my mom said. She stood at the threshold of the hall. I'd always thought she was a skeptic and just humored my dad about the windows and the whistler. But that night we were all believers. I noticed that both of my parents held baseball bats they must have taken from their bedroom. The knock came again, a little louder this time. "Please don't open the door," Holden whispered. My dad walked over to him, hugged him close. "We won't," my dad promised, still holding his bat. "Nothing is coming in here tonight." Thud, thud, thud. This time the knocking was loud enough to rattle the door. Holden screamed again, and Nola clutched her arms around my neck. My mom came over and knelt down next to us, wrapping my sister and me close. "Thud, thud, thud. Call the police," my mom whispered to my dad. The knocking instantly stopped. My dad looked over his shoulder at us. "Do you think—" He was cut off by frantic knocking that trailed off to a polite tap, tap, tap. "Police!" something said from the other side of the door. The voice from outside sounded exactly like my mom, like a parrot repeating the words back to her. "Police! Call the police! Tap, 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 police!" My mom pulled us closer. "Police, police, police, police." "Please stop," I heard her whisper. "I don't think calling them will help," my dad said. "How will we know when they're the ones at the door?" The knocking came back harder than before. The door shook, then it stopped. After a long moment, I heard the knocking again, but it was coming from our back door. We all turned together towards the back door, but the knocking immediately returned to the front door, front to back to front, loud, then quiet, then loud again. Suddenly, the sound was coming from both doors at once, big, heavy blows like a sledgehammer. Then something started rapping against all of the windows in the house, then the walls. It was like we were living inside a drum with a dozen people trying to play at once. Or we were a turtle and something was attempting to claw us out of our shell. "Stop!" Holden yelled. The knocking died. "I won't tell," Holden said, staring at the door. "I promise I won't tell anyone what I saw. Just please go away." We waited for nearly a minute, then we heard it, a soft tap, tap, tap coming from the window Holden had looked through earlier. Holden started to cry, sobbing like a prisoner watching gallows being built outside their cell. My dad held him, brushed his hair, but never lied to him, never told him things would be okay. The tapping at the window went on for the rest of the night. We huddled together in the living room for I don't know how long. Eventually, my mom tried to take us kids into my room while my dad stayed to watch the door. But the second we moved into my bedroom, the knocking came back, so loud it was possible to ignore. I was afraid the door couldn't take it. We went back to the living room and the knocking stopped. Only the tap, tap, tap on the window remained. None of us slept that night. The tapping stopped around 7 a.m. That's about the time the sun comes up here. We waited another 2 hours before my dad opened the blinds from one window. He made us all go back to my parents' bedroom first. I heard him open the door, then come back in. "Okay," he told us. "It's done." Holden's parents came back around lunchtime. My mom and dad walked Holden over to his house and they all went inside for quite a while. Nola and I watched from the window. She stuck to me the whole day, right at my side, sometimes holding my hand. When my parents came back, they looked grim, but wouldn't tell us what they said to Holden's family. It was a Sunday, so we all spent the day together, ordered pizza, and watched movies. That night, everyone slept in my room, Nola and my mom in the bed with me, my dad in a chair he'd pulled over. There was no knocking that night, or any night since. We didn't see much of Holden or his parents for the rest of that week, but by Thursday, there was a moving truck in their driveway. Nola and I watched them packing up the whole afternoon after school. What sticks with me most is how tired Holden and his parents looked. All three had the same pallor, grim mouths, and lightless eyes. Even from across the street, I could tell something was very wrong. Holden and his family were gone before sunset. I remember what the original welcoming committee said to my parents when we moved in. Not everyone who looks at the Whistler dies, but even those that live have the light go out of them and the rest of their lives are full of misfortune. A million little tragedies. I think Holden's parents must have looked, either to comfort him if they didn't believe or share the burden if they did. I watched Nola some days, happy and young and alive, and I wonder if I'd been slower. If she looked out the window that night, would I have looked too, to comfort her, to share that burden? I'm glad I don't have to find out. We still live in that house, in that neighborhood. We still hear our Whistler walking past every night. The blessings, the luck, the good things here are too good to leave. But we're careful. We don't have friends over to spend the night anymore. And my dad hides the key to the blinds very, very well. Not that I've gone looking. Some things you just don't need to look for. I'd worked as a police dispatcher for 9 years of my life. It's a career that takes a level of mental fortitude that I don't think many possess. I used to hate saying stuff like that, always thought it sounded so pretentious, but the truth is it takes a special type of person to be willing to voluntarily listen to some of the things we have to hear every single day. Don't get me wrong, the job wasn't always grim, and it even had its decent moments. I've got enough decently funny, drunk 911 call stories to last me several lifetimes, though the reality of the job was usually far darker. I understood that, though, and felt that I was more than equipped to deal with anything the job could throw at me. I was right for a while. For years, I had answered every call, always able to keep a steady head despite being faced with some horrific situations, my confidence in my ability to handle the job unwavering. Until the final call I ever took as a police dispatcher. I glanced at the time displayed at the corner of my computer screen, 11:43. I yawned, leaning backward in my chair with my arms extended as I rose into a stretch. I pulled free the headset, rubbing the feeling back into my ears with a sigh. I'd been at the desk since 3 in the afternoon, answering calls and dispatching officers as they were needed, which wasn't very often in our town. I lived in a little farm town in Illinois, about an hour or two out of Springfield, and though we weren't without our fair share of crime, usually property theft or some drug-related incidents, our phones never rang off the hook. This meant much of my job was comprised of long periods of mundanity between confronting individuals amidst moments of unparalleled panic, most undergoing the worst days of their lives. I was always okay with the downtime. As soul-wrenching as so many of the calls could be, moments of respite were always more than welcome. A notification on my screen caught my attention, and in an instant, I had returned to my seat, headset on. 911, what's your emergency? I spoke into my headset as automatically as any line repeated hundreds or thousands of times can be spoken. For a moment, the line was only dead silence. After several seconds came a reply. I need policemen. I think somebody is in my house, a child whispered from the other line. I felt the smallest of knots beginning to form in my stomach and shifted in my seat, chest tightening. I've always hated the calls with kids. They were among the few things I could still experience at that job, which it seemed I could never truly harden to. No amount of experience could ever do away with that near instinctual need to help, every natural instinct calling for me to help, and the nature of the job being one that meant I could only ever bear witness to innocence shattered by the unyielding cruelty of the adult world. Do you know your address? I asked, adopting a firm but lighter tone in response to the obvious youth of the caller. She was a little girl by the sound of her voice, and she was scared. That much was obvious. I needed to keep her calm enough to relay the information and follow instructions, and though I'd found kids surprisingly resilient under pressure, with the worry I could hear gripping her voice, I wasn't taking chances. I heard shuffling and heavy breathing from the other end, followed by a faint, "Wait." She returned moments later, whispering an address. "Good job. Do you know your phone number?" The process repeated, and I quickly relayed her information to a dispatched officer, punching it into the computer. Her address was on the edge of town, a little out of the way, and I understood that it might be a while before help arrived. I stifled a sigh, knowing better than to vocalize my worry as I received an estimated arrival time. "Is there an adult with you in the house?" I continued. "No," the little girl replied breathlessly, and I could hear the anxiety rising in her voice as she spoke, the quickening of her breathing and the faintest quiver. "My mom works late, and my sister is—" There was a pause, followed by an audible sniffle. "She's camping with her friends," and somewhere on her end of the line there was a crash. Then a scream. My heart dropped. "Are you still there? Are you all right?" There was a repetitive thumping, the sound of small feet moving, followed by the slam of a door. "I'm here," the little girl spoke breathlessly into the phone. "Are you all right?" I repeated the question. "Yes," was all she replied, barely above a whisper. Her tone worried me. She sounded more than afraid. Sad? No, disturbed felt more proper a word for it. Then she began to cry. Not as quiet as you would expect given her situation, but a deep, helpless sob that made my heart sink. When she spoke, it stopped altogether. "Please, please, please, help me." Her sobs turned into a hysterical cry, and I could hear loud, repetitive thumps from her end. Footsteps, and they were clearly not her own. They were heavy, far too heavy for a little girl. Without warning, a shrill cry, like the sound of microphone feedback, rang through my headset. The sudden assault on my ears caused me to jump, and my heart set off racing like a jackrabbit. I fought the instinct to throw the headset off and instead clenched my eyes shut as the noise faded as suddenly as it had come. "I saw it," she sputtered through sobs. "Oh, please, please, I don't know what it is." The frantic and frenzied nature of her begging increased, and a strangeness began to settle in the air that I couldn't quite place. A quick glance around the room confirmed that most of the desks around me were empty, and I was on the call alone. The thought made me feel very isolated, and a growing uneasiness continued to take hold of me that I couldn't place. Something about the call just felt wrong, and the realization at what she had said trickled through my mind with a coldness that made gooseflesh rise in its wake. She had said she had seen it. Confusion joined the cocktail of emotions I kept pressed behind the wavering veil of professionalism. "Sweetheart, police are on the way," I began. I tried to infuse the statement with my usual level of assertiveness and confidence, but I worried that the uneasiness might be audible in my voice. "You said you saw it? Can you tell me what you saw? For several moments, I could hear only her choppy breathing and the faintest hiss of static. I don't know. I don't know. Please, please, just help me. She was panicking. I had done this long enough to know that was dangerous. I had to get control of the situation before she became too hard to reach, that primal fear overwhelming conscious reason. Can you tell me your name? I asked, eager to center her in any way I could think. Amber? Okay, Amber. All right, that's a beautiful name. All right, Amber. Are you, or can you get somewhere safe? A way out? A back door, maybe? There was a pause. Yes, but it's downstairs, and that's where they are. I could hear her losing it, beginning to sob at the thought. I don't want to go down there. I'm scared. Okay, Amber, honey. I need you to stay calm, okay? You're doing awesome. Is there anywhere else you can go? A room with a door you can lock? I'm in my room, she said through sniffles, and it was obvious that she had been crying profusely. I locked the door. Good, I'm going to stay with you on the line. Is there anywhere for you to hide? The sound of footsteps grew in the background as her voice lowered to a whisper. I think under the bed, she whimpered. Okay, is there... I paused, thinking over my words before continuing. Anything you can use to protect yourself? There was silence on her end for a moment, followed by a hushed, yes. As she dropped the phone, I assumed to get a weapon or something that would function as one if the circumstances came to it. I prayed silently to any deity that might hear that it wouldn't. The clamor from within the house had grown closer to the phone, and the piercing ringing sound had returned. I was almost certain there had to be something wrong with my headset or with Amber's phone, and the sound grew to an almost unbearable extent, matched only by deafening thuds from somewhere on the phone. It sounded too close. I could feel the hairs begin to rise on the back of my neck, and the ominous sense of panic began to give way to an unexplained fear. The urge to look over my shoulder grew harder to fight as the persistent thudding sound grew louder, nearer. It all sounded too clear, I guess. There was no static, none of the white noise typical of a phone call, nothing. Just the sound of footsteps approaching closer. Closer. I gave in to my instinct, whipping around in my seat, nearly losing my headset. No one. I had no time to settle my nerves, as Amber returned to the line. Are you there? She whispered, yanking me from my fog and back into the moment. Yes, I replied. I struggled to shake off my fears. Something was very wrong with this situation. Despite my worries, I shifted my attention back to Amber. There isn't any weapon, the girl muttered, but I have something. There was a pause. Okay, what do you have? I asked, realizing my prompt was necessary. A rabbit. A pink rabbit, she said, and even over the phone, I could hear a little embarrassment. My dad gave her to me when I was little, she sniffled. He said she would keep me safe. I didn't know what to say for a moment, but didn't want to miss a beat. He was right, I said, as encouragingly as I could, despite the pit opening in my gut, threatening to swallow me from within like some black hole of dread. Everyone knows pink bunnies are great protection. Can you go back under? I was interrupted. Amber, I miss you. I could hear a man call from within the house, his voice almost hitching in a way that made my stomach turn. So the intruder knew her? Was he under the influence? There was something in the lilting pitch of his tone that made my every instinct scream. I furrowed my brow against the waves of unease. Amber, do you recognize that voice? I asked, hoping she could identify the intruder. There was silence for a moment before her response. It sounds like my daddy. Why does it sound like my dad? I blinked. What do you mean? That's my daddy's voice. Why does it have my daddy's voice? I didn't know how to respond to that. Hell, I didn't know what to think about any of it at all. She was making less sense as the moments went by. Have his voice? Her words caught, and yet before I could ask what she meant, we were interrupted by a sound. The thing we heard has taken me years to try to understand. I've come to believe it was that things laugh. At the time, though, we couldn't know. It was the sound of metal crunching in a car accident as it met flesh, a wet, grinding shriek that seemed to echo to the very core of me. I felt like I had to vomit, and my vision began to blur all at once as my head rang from a sheer animal sort of terror. It pains me to imagine what it was like for Amber to hear all that in person. "Amber," I panted, my senses returning to me all at once. She had had no time to respond before we heard it again. A voice, or voices rather, calling for her from somewhere distinctly nearby. They spoke as one, all with the same odd inhumane nature that curdled in me every animal instinct, which spoke of predators, things which made the darkness their own. "Amber, where are you, buddy?" Two distinct voices, the first as unnatural as ever, the other almost mockingly casual, as though coming from the mouth of some sitcom father without the canned laugh track, though again, with that odd stutter that made me think of a skipped record. My blood froze. Amber began to cry, and her cries eventually became half-intelligible pleas as she begged, and begged for help, her life, her mother, and for intervention. I was helpless to do more than promise, sat miles away in my seat, and yet the only party to her terror. Five more minutes, just 5 more minutes, I muttered, mentally cursing the timer which displayed the estimated arrival time of the dispatched officers. I prayed it would be soon enough. "It's outside the room," she whispered, her voice one of utter panic before breaking into a quiet sob. I breathed a curse under my breath. "Amber, I need you to hide right now if possible. The police are minutes away. I need you to hide and stay as quiet as possible. You're doing good, sweetheart. You're doing so good." There was no response, and in the quiet, the vice grip of desperation threatened to suffocate me, but I assumed from the shuffling sounds I could hear that she had gone back under the bed. For a few moments there was silence, then Amber spoke and my heart dropped. "I'm going to die." "You are not going to die, Amber," I began, fighting to keep the rising panic from my voice. "I promise." It's reaching under the door. Oh my God," she muttered. There was a crash, louder than before, and Amber began to shriek. The noises continued, and it began to dawn on me what I was hearing. It was breaking down the bedroom door. Amber's screams had devolved into horrified babbling and pleas for her life to whatever was on the other side of the door. Her screams were soon drowned out by the same noise as before, that sick, twisted laughter. "What are you?" Amber shrieked, loud enough to make my ears ring. "Please, what are you?" What I heard next I still struggle to make sense of. I have been on hundreds, maybe thousands of calls, and I have heard things that only sleep brought on by the sort of pills that chase away the bad dreams, let you forget for moments, and still there was nothing like that. "What are you?" the person on the other end mocked, in a voice that was some sick parody of Amber's, like it had been recorded and altered and recorded again 1,000 times until it was a lilting hack of a thing. Panic gripped me as I glanced back at the corner of the monitor displaying the dispatched unit's arrival time. 1:36. Please God, let it be soon enough. "Amber, are you there?" I called. "Amber?" As suddenly as it had started, everything went silent. Somewhere in the distance, I heard sirens. "I hear them, Amber. Officers are a minute away." Silence. My heart began to sink. From the corner of my office, one of the desk lamps on another of the tables flickered once, twice. My head pounded, stomach turning with a nauseating dread. "Amber, are you there?" I could hear something shifting, breathing. Despite myself, I spun to glance around the room, finding nothing. I think it's gone," Amber finally spoke. The surge of relief that rolled through me was almost dizzying, and I let out a sigh and leaned back in the chair. 27 seconds, the dispatch time read, and the sirens in the background grew louder. "You did very well, Amber. Police are almost there. You did really well." I couldn't think of what else to say. I'd never had a call like this, and something about it all felt so strange. Something Amber had said began to ring in my mind. "What are you?" "Amber," I began, "what did you see?" I was met with silence. "Amber?" Amber began to laugh. "Amber," I breathed, almost pleading, as a disconcerting sort of realization came crashing down on me. Her laughter grew more raucous and less human with every second. Somewhere in the background, there was a knocking sound. They'd finally arrived, too late. I asked the only thing I could think at the moment. Why? The laughter stopped abruptly as the thing on the phone spoke. When it did, my stomach plummeted into a pit that seemed to consume all of me as I heard myself. 911, what's your emergency? There was a click, and the line went dead. The house was empty when officers arrived. No signs of forced entry anywhere except the door to Amber's bedroom, the bottom of which had been torn away by something leaving a wide space to crawl beneath. And Amber, or what was left of her, decorated the room. Whatever had been there left nothing behind to identify it, only carnage. The case was never officially closed, and everyone at the station had their theories as to what had happened that day, ranging from some one-off murderer to a bear attack and everything in between. The call was never made public. Not my decision. Things were out of my hands from the moment that line went dead, but it's not a call I necessarily complained about either. I never want to hear that recording again. I put in my 2 weeks' notice that same night, though I never returned to work after that day. That call was the last I ever took as a police dispatcher. The last I will ever take as one, if I have any say in the matter. I work in social media now. The pay is a bit better, honestly, and most of it can be done from home, which is good, because these days I find it hard to venture outside much anymore. The world has never seemed quite so welcoming as a place since then, as it has wide, vast, and full of dark corners and things which call them home and sometimes lurk forth into our light. I've been content to try and forget about that call. As callous as it may sound, I have been content trying to forget about Amber, to forget whatever spoke to me on the phone that night, but I don't think it's done with me. Last night I dreamed, despite my medicine, and despite the unwavering blackness which has filled my nights, I dreamed. Or perhaps thought I was dreaming. I could hear the sounds of footsteps, quiet at first, as though someone were tiptoeing about the bottom floor of my home, each measured step setting a floorboard to squealing, before it became a clamoring run throughout my house, as something screeched and laughed and mocked me just outside my bedroom door. I stayed in my bed long into this morning despite the sounds having stopped hours ago, paralyzed by a mixture of fear and confusion, until eventually I was able to convince myself to leave the bed. I crossed the room, cursing every creak the floor made under my weight. I lowered myself to the ground, holding my breath as I peered under my bedroom door. There was something there, but it wasn't moving. I mustered up the little bravery I had left and rose to my feet, my eyes shut tight and a prayer on my lips. I pulled open my bedroom door slightly and stuck my head out just enough to see what lay outside. I stifled a gasp, and tears flooded my eyes as I bent over to pick up the object. Sitting right outside my door, just beyond the threshold as if awaiting invitation, sat a little pink bunny covered in dark stains. From somewhere within the unnatural shroud of darkness that seemed to fill the hallway, just footsteps beyond the relative safety of the bedroom door, Amber's laughter echoed. The woman at the door said her husband was inside my home. She was agitated and ran her fingers through her unwashed hair. "You have the wrong address. It's just me," I said, then lied. "And my boyfriend is here." No, please, just listen to me," she said, placing a hand on the door frame and leaning in toward me. I said I couldn't help her, said again she had the wrong address, then shut the door. But I could still hear her. "I don't know what he'll do. Let me in. Let me find him," she said, her muffled voice sharpening while her palm drummed on the door. "He stands still." I froze in the entryway and waited full minutes after it sounded like she had left, in case her ear was pressed to the door. I didn't give much thought to her husband at first. There was something off about her, how she tried to talk so calmly, even though it was obvious she was coiled tight enough to snap. She kept floating on her toes, looking into my apartment behind me. But she also didn't seem outcast, or even neglected, really. Her cashmere sweater and tapered pants told a different story. So I searched my apartment with the crowbar I kept under the sheets in the linen closet. No one was in the front rooms, with their windows facing the street. I had been there all day, so it was impossible for anyone to have broken in that way. Then I remembered the old dumbwaiter shaft. It was behind the kitchen door, shut behind a hinged metal slab. To keep noise from bleeding between apartments, it was no longer an open shaft, but a dusty compartment used as a pass-through for cables. I brought along my biggest chef's knife from the drawer across from the refrigerator. The steel panel was painted the same color as the wall and had no handle or latch. Instead, there was a small, jagged hole punched in one side with several drill bit plunges. I dug a screwdriver out of the junk drawer and tried to pry it open with a single jerk so I could step back and hold out the blade in my other hand. Instead, it swung open with a painfully slow creak, and I dropped the knife, scaring myself even more when it clattered at my feet. Without thinking, I bent down to pick it up. Kneeling on the floor, I imagined a pale hand reaching out into my hair and skull, but when I stood up and looked inside, there was nothing there, just the dark. It was empty. When I left the kitchen and crossed by the front door again, I saw that the woman had shoved a piece of paper in my door like a takeout menu. It was a torn envelope, like something pulled crumpled from the trash, and had written on it the words, "Listen, please." Then I heard her whisper from low down on the door, even below where I had knelt to pull at the scrap of paper. The first time my husband was around the corner from our French doors, in the hollow where my desk meets the printer cabinet. He must have been there all morning. He was standing straight up, like a sunflower, but I didn't see him until I got up from the desk and bumped my ankle. When I looked up, suddenly he was there, staring at nothing. The second time he was behind an all-glass display case in our entryway, pinched between a pane and the wall just inside the front door. The whispering stopped, and I realized I was barely breathing. I was still kneeling, and my knees were beginning to get sore. "Are you still there?" the whispered voice asked. I didn't answer. "He's gotten really skinny and goes through tubes of high SPF sunscreen whenever he is called out to a site, so now he's white as an electric socket. He can suppress his presence and take away your intuitive sense that another person is nearby. He's practicing. He's getting better. He knows where your eyes land and the spaces they slide over." "Go away!" I screamed before retreating to the farthest corner of my apartment away from the front door. It took me a while to calm down, with some television and all the lights on. I didn't pay attention to the show, but told myself that the woman at the door had a mental illness and a persecution complex, and she wanted to pull me into her delusion. I crept to the window and peered into the park across the street from my house. It was small and mostly mown, with a picnic pavilion and a swing set. But right across from me was a shock of forest, rising up, curling and unwanted. The sun was still up, but low enough for this thicket to be dark in its own shadows. I looked for her there, expecting, I didn't know what, 2 red eyes? I didn't see her and opened the blinds fully. A few families were playing volleyball down at the farthest end of the park, but it was otherwise empty. Then I caught the blue light off an e-cigarette. It was her, seated in a shadowed beach chair, with her legs stacked casually in front of her. I could barely see her face, but it looked as if she was staring into my windows. I debated whether to go out to confront her, but when I turned around, I saw her husband. I didn't scream. My throat snapped shut on my breath. Through the kitchen doorway across the room, I could see my dishwasher and him standing next to it, one leg against the fridge. He wasn't standing straight, but bent forward at a right angle, his back aligned with the marble countertop. One arm was held pinned against his thigh, the other down, then the wrist up with fingers out in odd angles. His face pointed forward, aligned atop his body like a bullet on a shell casing, with his eyes aimed to one side of me and far away. He wore an expression of rapture on a pale face. His lips were glittering red. He didn't move or react and showed no signs of being detected. But I still expected those eyes to swivel and land on me. Didn't feel I could move or look away until they did. I forced myself to clap, then to wave my arms, but there was no reaction. "You!" I said. "Sir," I added, "you need to leave." He didn't react, and it wasn't just as if he was ignoring me. There wasn't a tremor or a breath. He stayed so still it was as if the whole world had frozen. I called 911. Of course, the operator urged me to get out of the house as quickly as possible. I stayed on the line with the operator, but there was nothing left to say. My only way out was past him. Acid filled my stomach. There was no way I could cross that room. I considered tossing something at him or attacking him, but there was nothing more dangerous than a television remote nearby. The operator said something about officers on the way, and my phone slipped from my hand in my rush to bring it back to my ear. My eyes never dropped from the husband, who didn't flinch when my phone crunched on impact, then clattered across the floor and under the couch. I lowered myself to my hands and knees and considered crawling over and reaching under until I realized it would put him out of sight. It was better to escape. Maybe I could crawl by him without touching him and he would stay frozen. Or would he just grab me when I got close? I didn't have a choice. At the threshold between hardwood and tile, I looked down at my hands on the floor, and when I looked up, he was gone. But it was only for an instant, because suddenly I could see him again just in front of me. He hadn't moved. My eyes had let him go and struggled to find him again, like he wasn't where I had expected, or if I had somehow forgotten him. The arms holding me up shook so violently that I pitched forward, landing on the side of my face with a smack. I landed right at his feet, but didn't touch him. Pushing back on the heels of my hands, I rolled backwards and slammed into the cabinet behind me, hard enough that I heard the fiberboard crack inside the door. I could crawl by him now, but first watched him for any sign of movement. He was in a khaki t-shirt that didn't quite match the wood cabinetry or stand out from the white refrigerator at his back. Nor were his dark pants much of a match for the brushed chrome of the dishwasher, though I could see he had a sliver of something shimmery silver, like a lanyard loop, hanging out from his pocket. I don't know how he could have disappeared from my sight, but he didn't seem to notice me. I strained to keep an eye on him over my shoulders as I crawled past until I couldn't move slowly any longer. I scrambled to my feet, tumbling into a standing position, then into a headlong run where I couldn't tell my heartbeats from the pounding of feet on the floor. After struggling with the lock, I finally squeezed through my front door and shut it behind me without looking back. The police came, searched my apartment, found no one. I tried to explain that he might still be there, that they just hadn't seen him, but they wouldn't come back in with me. They wouldn't search the park either. They were annoyed I wouldn't go back inside, but eventually left. I didn't have my phone and didn't know where to go, so I wandered out of my building in a daze. It was dark out now, but the night air felt good. I saw a car double parked, but didn't pay it any attention until the woman pushed open the passenger side door from the driver's seat and waved me over. I'd be embarrassed to describe the horrible things I said to her. But she was calm and composed. She knew how to handle her husband standing still, and was nothing like the woman who first confronted me on my doorstep. I don't want to give her real name, so I'll call her Flora. "I'll teach you to see him," was the first thing Flora told me once I was able to listen. I didn't want to see him or to go anywhere with this person, but I didn't know what else to do. She drove me far outside of the city until I could see stars over a sprawling suburbia. Somewhere nearer the highway, where duplex condos faded into industrial parks, she turned into a multi-acre construction site. It was all blonde dirt, scraped and marked by bulldozer treads. At the center was a cinder block frame that might one day grow into a big box store. She turned off her headlights, and suddenly the feeling I had ignored, in favor of her serene understanding of my situation, could no longer be ignored. I was struck dumb with fear, my sore muscles protesting at being called back to alert. Had I met a couple working together? But she kept talking reasonably, kept her instructions simple, and I found no moment to protest. Instead, I followed her, even let her take me by the hand and pull me in a circuitous path out into the center of the standing blocks. She laid out a picnic blanket and urged me to lie on my back next to her with a friendly pat. Inside, I was screaming as, "We're in the middle of one of the dimmer meteor showers that don't get headlines," she said. "But we can see one every few minutes if we know how to look. Men who stand still," she told me, "can't be searched out like a bird among branches or a face in the crowd. That is a search for specificity. Even if you could live in a state of constant scrutiny, where every pixel of reality is examined, you would not often find these unmoving men. They slip into your scotoma and escape your attention because they are no longer objects to be found." "There was one," she said, pointing to a part of the sky. "Did you see that one?" I hadn't. "Because you are darting around looking for shooting stars," she said, "instead of looking at the surface of reality." Her husband had receded into the sky of our day-to-day existence, she said. When standing still, he wasn't an object to be found in space. but had shut down every part of himself to become permanent. She taught me to make my eyes flat and to search without an idea of what I wanted to see. To see them, you can no longer want anything from the sky, she said. You have to deaden yourself to know what surrounds you. I laughed when I saw the first shooting star and forgot about my terrible day. Then there was another and another. Now please, please don't be afraid, she said, sitting up and placing her hand on my goose-pimpled forearm. I looked around with my meteor eyes. There were men standing in strange shapes pressed against the cinder blocks and standing in the mud at bent angles and even across the street, holding themselves straight. I see them everywhere now, she whispered. There are so many of them standing still. I left the hitchhiker behind. But he was waiting at every stop. Ever start dating someone where everything is going a little too well, so you start worrying for no reason whatsoever? No one could be that perfect. And even if they were, then there's no way they would look twice at you. The only logical explanation is that they aren't as perfect as they pretend to be, which leaves you playing detective trying to figure out the catch. Maybe all those little quirks that you find adorable now are going to drive you crazy in a few months. Maybe she even has a dark secret, hard drugs or hating dogs, or that one time she killed a man with a stiletto heel in a fit of passionate rage. There's an easy solution if you want to find out who someone really is. Take a long road trip with them. If you're still together by the end, then it was meant to be. My girlfriend, I'll call her Emily, not her real name, somehow thought it was a good idea to drive 1,000 miles together across the country after we've only been dating for 2 months. We're both pretty busy with work and don't get to spend much time together, so naturally being locked up in a prison cell on wheels for 2 days was going to be an improvement. First 100 miles, so far so good, holding hands, singing to the radio together, uncontrollable laughter when she found out I knew all the words to Skater Boy. Sue me, it's a catchy song. And if the road ended there and we turned around, we might have lived a long and happy life together. It was when we passed the hitchhiker that everything began to fall apart. Let's give him a ride, Emily said, squeezing my hand. We'll be on this road forever anyway. We don't even know where he's going, I told her. He's probably just going to rob us and steal our car. Which is true of everyone you don't know, and most of them you do, as far as I'm concerned. His clean-pressed suit didn't reassure me either. That just meant he'd successfully robbed someone before me, which actually made him even more dangerous. The guy didn't even have a sign or anything. He was just sitting by the freeway ramp, spastically waving his thumb like he was guiding an airplane to land. It was my turn to drive, and I just sailed right past. Emily and I started bickering after that. She thought I wasn't compassionate, and I thought she was reckless. It took about 10 minutes before she finally dropped it, although it wasn't because she'd conceded. Hey look, there's another one, sitting by the side of the road, waving his thumb like it was the end of the world. It wasn't another one though, it was the same guy, I'm sure of it. Only this time he looked like he'd been out here for a few days. His suit was streaked with dirt and his hair was greasy. There was a desperate strain in his face, like a proud man trying to conceal his embarrassment. It wasn't just my imagination either. Emily recognized him too. How do you think he got here so fast? She wondered. I don't know, and I don't care, I said. This trip is supposed to be about us, so let's not get distracted. My car blew past him and I stayed the course. We started arguing again, and even when we agreed to drop it, the argument just slithered into new topics. She hated my music. I hated how judgmental she was. I was controlling. She was picking fights over nothing. It kept getting worse until we saw something that shut both of us up real fast. The hitchhiker again. Another 20 miles down the road from where we'd seen him last. The bottom part of his shirt and jacket were ripped to shreds, and blood was soaking through a concealed stomach wound. He was stumbling along the side of the road, weaving erratically, wandering straight onto the highway at times before pitching off to the side. Emily could not believe that I didn't stop. I couldn't believe she still wanted me to. I was starting to feel really uneasy by this point, and the stress of our arguing was only making it worse. She kept yelling about how he was hurt and needed help. She refused to even acknowledge how weird it was that he kept getting ahead of us. She almost caused an accident by grabbing my wheel when I refused to turn around. We drove for the next 50 miles in silence. I turned the radio back on, but she snapped it back off immediately. It wasn't until I pulled off for gas when we saw him again. face down on the side of the road, shirt and jacket gone, long, even, bloody gashes from his shoulders to his rear, almost like bear claws or something. I stopped the car and parked behind him. Emily jumped out and knelt beside the body. She looked up at me with uncomprehending rage burning behind her eyes, like this was my fault somehow. "He's dead," she said, standing up. "Can I call this in to the police, or is that too much of an inconvenience for you too?" I nodded, absolutely numb. I filled up on gas while she waited with the body until the police arrived. They asked us a few questions, but neither Emily nor I felt comfortable explaining that this wasn't the first time we'd seen him. They took our information and let us get back on the road after about 15 minutes. The car was silent for a long time after that. It was starting to get dark and I kept suggesting places to spend the night, but Emily just shrugged and stared out the window. At the rate we were going, we'd be breaking up by the end of the trip and I wanted it to be over as soon as possible. I just kept driving, long after the sun went down. Emily fell asleep around midnight, but I kept going. She was so beautiful like that, and everything was going so well before this. It was just so frustrating that such a random event that neither of us could predict would destroy us like this. By around 2 a.m., I was getting real tired, but I decided not to give up. Maybe if she woke up and we were already there, then she'd see how hard I worked for her. Maybe then we'd still have a chance to patch things up. I caressed her hand, and she returned the pressure. I flirted with the thought that everything was going to be okay, at least until she woke up and started screaming. There wasn't any safe shoulder to get off the highway, so I had no choice but to keep going. She shut up quick enough, but it was still about 10 seconds of hysterical breathing before she could explain what was going on. "Behind you, in the back seat." I glanced back, then back at the road, then back again. The hitchhiker was in the back seat, naked, filthy, covered with black blood and old wounds. His elbows rested on his knees as he leaned toward us, evidently still alive as he cocked his head to regard me curiously. "Get off the road!" Emily started screaming again. "I can't! Get him out!" "Did you go back? What's he doing here?" "I don't know. Open the door or something." I slowed down gradually and put my flashers on to warn the car behind me. The hitchhiker reached around behind Emily and grabbed her by the throat. I slammed my fist into his arm and felt something give way under the soft, rotting skin. When I lifted my hand, I could see a black bone from his forearm protruding straight through the skin. He didn't seem bothered in the least. She was crying as the dirty fingers dug into her throat, pushing through the skin like it was made out of dough. She was thrashing so hard that one of her flailing fists smashed straight through the window. I managed to safely stop the car, but there was nothing I could do to break the indomitable grip around her neck. I jumped out of the car and ran around to the back seat with the hitchhiker. Maybe if I had a clearer shot at him, I could drag him out. I flung open the door and lunged inside, falling face first into an empty seat. I thought he'd already escaped somehow and ripped open the passenger side door. Emily was gone too. If it wasn't for the blood and the broken window, I would have thought I'd gone completely insane. I spent the next hour searching the surrounding area with my flashlight. They were both gone without a trace. I considered calling the police, but I realized that if I wasn't already a suspect after the first body was found, then I'd definitely be one now that I was soaked in blood and my girlfriend was the one to disappear. All I could do was get back on the road, drive home and never tell another soul what happened. That was my plan. It wasn't good, but it's all I had, and I would have done it too if I hadn't just passed Emily standing by the side of the road, clean, healthy, waving her thumb enthusiastically in the air. That was a few miles back, but I stopped to write this because I don't know what to do from here. If I see her again, do I pick her up, or just keep driving and hope for the best? In October of last year, I saw the black-eyed children for the first time. They floated just outside the open window, their skin a pale white, and their eyes as dark and void as the deepest hole you can imagine. I had become lost in those eyes. Have you ever had a nightmare you can't remember? I awoke abruptly, covered in sweat, and my heart beating faster than it ever had before. Yet I couldn't recall the goings-on of my mind that had shaken me so thoroughly. Sitting up at the edge of my bed, I stared over at my 8-year-old son. "Ben, monsters aren't real. There's nothing to be afraid of," I had said, night after night with little result. But that wasn't true, was it? There was plenty to be afraid of. Since his mother had died, Each night had progressed the same. I would tuck him in, Ben would promise that he would stay in his own room tonight, and I would kiss him on the forehead. I would then walk tiredly to my own bedroom, close the door quietly, take more than my fair share of melatonin, and drift off to sleep. Upon awakening, I would most certainly find my son gently nestled against my shoulder. Thinking it to be the natural result of losing his mother, I hadn't thought much of it. That was until the nightmares started and the children began their nightly visit. The first night I saw them, I was sure it had been a dream. The bed was nearly pressed up against the window and my son was directly below it. The two children reached their arms through the opening and were only inches away from grabbing my son. Somehow holding back a scream, I reached out to push the cold arms away, and then I shut the window and locked it with a loud click. "Dad," Ben had said, having perhaps awoken from his own nightmare. Before he could see the two children, I quickly closed the curtains and pressed my back up against the window. "What are you doing, Dad?" he continued. "Nothing. Go back to bed," I said quietly, having no idea what to say or do. This is what I did. Each night, I would lock the windows securely and shut the blinds so tightly that it was impossible to see anything. I made it a rule in our house that each night, every window must be locked securely and the blinds shut. I think I made up some excuse about burglars choosing houses where they could see inside. A few nights later, I peeked through the blinds and saw the two children, pale as death, back to where they had been that first night. I became lost in the depths of their eyes, and I watched as they looked from me to my son. "No! You can't have him!" I whispered angrily, snapping back into reality and pushing the blinds closed. As time continued, Ben's nightmares increased. "Dad, sometimes at night I see things," Ben said, fear washing over his face. I interrupted quickly. "I know what you see, Ben, and don't worry, they can't get you." He began to cry as he looked up at me. "You promise?" Tears flowed down my cheeks, then as well as I hugged him close. "I promise." Embracing him tightly, I looked over his shoulder and toward the tightly shut window. I couldn't see the dead children, but I still knew they were out there. Perhaps there were even more than the night before. Months went by and Ben eventually got to the point where he wanted to try sleeping in his own room again. "I don't want to be afraid anymore, Dad." He paused and looked up at me. "They can't get me, right?" I was lost for words, trying to hide the fact that I was indeed thinking it over. I had not only boarded off my son's bedroom window, but had sealed it as well. Nothing could get through, I was sure of it. And it wasn't right to have my son always living in fear. "Okay, Ben." Shortly after, I set up a live camera in the corner of his room facing his bed and where the window had been. I wanted my son to find courage and face his fears, but I didn't want to take any chances either. I tested the camera feed carefully and then went to tuck him in. I kissed him on the forehead and my son hugged me close. "Don't worry, Dad, I'm not afraid anymore," he said. I was beyond proud of my son. Not only had he lost his mother, he had been given real monsters to contend with, and he had shown courage and determination in the face of all of it. "I'm so proud of you," I whispered. That night, I didn't sleep at all, only watching the camera feed to my son's room. I'd placed the lens facing his bed and the closed-off window, just in case. Nothing happened for hours, until I did something so simple, something I would regret for the rest of my life. I went to the kitchen for a glass of water. I was gone no more than 20 seconds when I heard him. "Dad!" Ben screamed, making me drop the glass. I watched as it shattered onto the kitchen floor. "Ben!" I screamed, rushing to his bedroom. "Ben, hang on!" I shouted again, now just outside his room. When I burst through the door, I felt my heart stop. My son's bed was empty, and he was gone. "Ben! Ben!" I screamed, searching frantically for him. The window was still boarded off and sealed, yet my son was gone nonetheless. The police never found him, and I could tell from how the detective in charge eyed me over that I was their main suspect. It wasn't until 2 weeks later that I found Ben's drawings from the previous months. There were no dead children outside the window, and no monsters with black eyes. There was something else entirely. Please, if you ever see the black-eyed children outside your window, please, God, don't make the same mistake that I did. They aren't monsters. I think they were trying to warn us. As I sit today and stare out the window, I tell myself that maybe, just maybe, I'll find my son again one day. I have to think that. It's the only thing that keeps me alive. I glanced down at my son's notebook from months earlier. One page stands out among the rest. There is a drawing of his room, the window boarded off, and my son sleeping peacefully. The closet door is cracked open, and a large clawed hand can be seen reaching through toward his bed. I was worried when I first inherited Claudette that she would be lonely and depressed. I knew parrots were supposed to be social creatures, but I was barely equipped to handle one, much less get her a companion. Aunt June, who had generously given the bird to me after discovering how loud and energetic she could be, assured me that Claudette was an independent sort and would be fine on her own. Claudette and I had a rocky start. I was timid around her large beak and sharp claws, and she was slow to trust yet another new person. She'd apparently had a number of homes in her 25 years, all of whom had given her up much the same as Aunt June had. That was mostly why I kept her. I felt sorry for her and wanted her to finally have a home, even if it meant a steep learning curve. We had what felt like a very long period of adjustment, during which I learned that getting bitten, while painful, could have been much worse, and she started to at least recognize me as the hand that fed her. When I discovered she was happiest in my small, screened-in porch, I moved her cage there and gave her free run of it, which also improved our relationship. It took a lot of time, patience, and treats, but eventually it got to the point that she would fly over to me whenever I went out and sit on my arm while she inhaled whatever I'd brought her. If I'd been worried about her getting lonely while I was away, those concerns were quickly banished when I realized she was making fast friends with the mockingbirds who nested in a tree behind my apartment. They'd trade calls and squawk at each other throughout the day, which sometimes got me in a little trouble with my more noise-sensitive neighbors, but that wasn't anything a few homemade cookies and apology cards couldn't smooth over. I'd never considered getting a parrot before, but Claudette proved to be a sweet, smart girl once you got past her initial orneriness, and I learned that she had a fairly extensive and sometimes colorful vocabulary and was an excellent little mimic. I also found out that over the course of a few months while I was at work, she'd apparently been teaching the mockingbirds a thing or two. I was sitting on the porch one evening giving Claudette a little neck scratch before going in to make dinner when I heard a soft but very distinct voice coming from somewhere overhead. "Crap," it said. I jumped, having not seen or heard anyone approach, and looked around, but my little corner of the apartment complex was quiet and no one was outside. In my lap, Claudette started to bob her head, her feathers ruffling ever so slightly. "Crap," the voice said again. "Crap," Claudette answered. She and the voice went back and forth a few more times, enthusiastically shouting one of her favorite words, until I rushed her inside in embarrassment and to keep whoever was taunting her from going any further. It wasn't until I saw one of her mockingbird friends swoop by the porch a few times, obviously in search of Claudette, that I realized the voice I'd been hearing hadn't been someone encouraging her naughty behavior. It had been the mockingbirds mimicking her. Claudette had taught the wild birds to swear. It was going to take a lot more cookies to get back on my neighbor's good sides when they figured that one out. Instead of moving her inside, I decided to try and encourage her to use sweeter phrases that I hoped the mockingbirds would pick up on. "Hello," I said over and over again. "Hello," Claudette said. "Crap," the mockingbird said. Crap indeed. I hadn't even known mockingbirds could talk, much less how to get them to pick up new words, so I scoured the internet and asked around, hoping for some insight. "They just repeat what they hear often," one bird enthusiast replied when I left a comment on a forum. "They'll pick up something else soon." A mockingbird near me constantly called my dogs for ages until it picked up a new bird song. Good luck. Okay, I told myself, I could wait them out. In the meantime, I kept working with Claudette to clean up her own language and spent a bit of time every night repeating words to her and rewarding her when she got them right. It took a few more weeks and months, but the swearing was definitely on a decline, and I hadn't heard the mockingbirds repeating her anymore, so I was counting it a victory. One morning, when I went out to feed her before I left for work, she bobbed and paced along her rung with her usual enthusiasm, but I noticed she was making these odd, raspy noises, like she couldn't quite catch her breath. I took her up on my arm and gave her a quick once-over while stroking her back. "You okay?" I asked. "Hello," she said, and the odd breathing stopped. I waited for a little while, almost enough time to make me late, but she seemed fine and I rushed out to get to work. The next morning, however, the low, rasping noises were back. She again came over to me and fluffed and bobbed, all the while making the ragged breathing sounds. Outside, the mockingbirds were responding with unusual clicking noises. I didn't pay much attention to them, too concerned for my poor parrot. Unable to leave her again when she was in such an obvious state of distress, I called my boss to let her know I had a family emergency and hurried Claudette to the nearby vet. I told them in a quavering voice that I was sure she had some kind of serious illness and explained that she was having trouble breathing, and they ushered me into a room to wait for the doctor. When he came in, I again told him about the sounds and begged him to listen to Claudette. She was sitting in her travel cage, preening quietly, completely undisturbed by the fact that her life was hanging in the balance. I swear she sounded horrible yesterday and today, I insisted. Sometimes these things come and go, Dr. Graham said gently. Can you do me a favor? Imitate the sound she was making. I quickly did as he asked, hoping I'd be accurate enough for him to understand the severity of the situation, and immediately Claudette started to mimic me. Dr. Graham hid a small smile behind his hand before catching himself and becoming serious again. She's fine, Stacy. It seems she may have, overheard you during some nighttime activities and is just repeating those sounds. What? I think she's heard you with a partner. You know, during intimate moments. Claudette emphasized his statement with an unmistakable little moan. With my face burning a bright red, I packed up my bird, mumbled an apology, and thanked him, and practically ran out of the office. You've been listening to the neighbors, I accused a now whistling Claudette on the way home. Or has someone been playing their TV too loud? How did you learn to make those noises? It certainly hadn't been from me, that much I knew. Whatever it was, it must have been going on for a while if she was starting to mimic it. I couldn't just go around asking my neighbors if they were getting down and dirty with the windows open, so for now I just have to try and keep a closer eye on what she was getting exposed to. When I released her back onto the porch, she squawked a chorus of hellos to the mockingbirds, who sang back, and then settled on top of her cage for a nap in the sun. I sat on the porch with her for a good portion of the day, but didn't hear anything particularly telling, and eventually gave up when it became uncomfortably warm outside. I still poked my head out on occasion, but the most unusual thing I heard was the mockingbirds making their newly picked up clicking sound. While it was familiar, I couldn't quite place where I'd heard it before and dismissed it. Claudette's heavy breathing sounds started to become a more frequent part of our morning, along with the occasional moan, and every so often she'd mumble to herself, "Pretty, pretty, pretty." At least that was an improvement on crap. She and the mockingbirds continued their back and forth, and I got used to their clicking noises the same way I had their swearing. It was especially bad in the morning when Claudette was doing what I came to call her breathing exercises. Ragged breathing, click, click, moan, click, click, rinse and repeat until midday. I just had to wait them out, and they'd eventually move on to some new sound to try and drive me crazy with. But the more I heard it, the more I realized there was something about the click, which was becoming more refined and distinct every day, that kept nagging at me. I knew the sound, and given a bit more time, I was sure I'd pinpoint exactly what they were imitating, but it continued to elude me. "How's Claudette doing?" my sister asked while we drank wine and had our weekly Thursday night phone call. I was sitting in my living room in my pajamas, little more than a tank top and a pair of shorts that were too small to wear out in public, with my phone in one hand and my glass in the other. I'd left my sliding glass door leading out to the porch opened just wide enough for Claudette to waddle inside if she wanted to join me. She's fine, still doing that nasty breathing thing. You figure out who's taught it to her? I'm leaning towards the Johnsons. They've always struck me as exhibitionist types. Raina giggled. Aren't they the old people? Yeah, and they need some loving too. While we laughed, I heard a series of very soft clicks through the open door. Oh, I said, the mockingbirds are doing the thing I told you about. Maybe you can hear them and tell me what this darn noise is. I sprang up from my couch and crossed the living room to yank back the sheer curtain hanging across the slider. The clicking stopped immediately. Beside me, Claudette paced back and forth across her cage top, mumbling all the while. Pretty, pretty, pretty. A bush on the other side of the screen shook just slightly. The light from inside my apartment reflected off the porch screen, making it difficult to see outside, and I froze. I can't hear them, Raina said in my ear. Stacy? The bushes rustled again. Claudette started to make the shuddering, raspy breathing sounds. From the trees overhead, the mockingbirds responded with their clicks. I now recognized the sound with sudden, chilling clarity. Raina, I said as calmly as I could, I think someone's in my bushes." As soon as the words left my mouth, a dark figure sprang upright and was making a mad dash around the side of the apartment building. It happened so quickly that I couldn't make out much. No features, nothing significant, just dark clothes and maybe a hat, and then he was gone. Raina was asking me in a near panic if she should call the police while I was too stunned to answer. It had taken months for me to teach Claudette words, months for her to pick up new sounds, months for her to learn to mimic accurately. No doubt it would have taken the same amount of time listening to someone breathing heavily and moaning to repeat the sounds accurately. My stomach dropped, fast and far, and I thought I might vomit. She hadn't learned those sounds from noisy neighbors or a television show. She'd learned it from the man who'd been hiding outside my apartment, panting like a dog while he watched me. I stumbled back against the slider and scrambled to get inside again. Over my shoulder, one of the mockingbirds called out into the night from a treetop. Click, click, the perfect imitation of a camera shutter. I've talked about my road trip on this board before. Sick to death of working myself to death, I took the first vacation of my life last year. A beat-up, rebuilt Yamaha Zuma and a foolish sense of optimism carried me across the western United States on an adventure that seriously made me rethink everything I thought I knew about the world. I loved Seattle, with the hip, original hippie neighborhoods and the perma-carnival atmosphere of Pike Place Market. The bridge troll was a highlight. Gotta love a city that sees a bridge and goes, "You know what this needs? A giant concrete troll." Getting out of Seattle, however, was a total nightmare. Restricted to back roads by a motor that capped at 40 miles an hour, I must have gotten lost a dozen times despite all the help I received from baffled gas station attendants. So I was behind schedule when it came to finding my campsite. Some miles south and a little east of the city, there's a free campground. It's most often used by horse riders, and boy, can you smell it. That's actually what guided me in the last few miles. There's a gravel road off of a service road, and then a few crooked, unpaved paths off of that. The trail markers were all bent, broken, or faded. In the end, I had to follow my nose. I set up my junior scout tent in the fading twilight. Mine was the only one there. I had the place all to myself. After a quick meal of apples pilfered from a previous campground, I did my usual travelogue spiel to my video camera by lantern light before turning in. I'm not sure how long I slept. I know I checked the time, but I'll be darned if I can recall what it was. Something had disturbed my well-earned beauty rest, but I was too groggy to remember what it had been. I sat in a stupor, too alert to fall back asleep, but too sleepy to be totally awake. Something brushed the side of my tent, and suddenly I was more awake than I'd ever been. I had done plenty of camping by that point. I was familiar with the sounds of the usual nighttime critters, from raccoons to coyotes. Nothing had ever bothered me in my tent before, only snuffling around camp before wandering off and leaving me be. From the sound of the footsteps, it was walking on two legs. That was a first. My mind immediately jumped to the worst possible conclusion: a bear. There's a lot of conflicting information out there about how to deal with bears, and a lot of it depends on the type of bear. Sitting there in the dark with my heart beating in my throat, I had no way of telling which species I was dealing with. Shout out or play dead? I was 30 yards from a sturdy cement block outhouse that might be better shelter. As quietly as I dared, I slipped my boots on and got ready to dash. The tent zipper seemed impossibly loud in the night as I worked it open, centimeter by centimeter. I moved agonizingly slowly. Once outside, I craned my neck around to see if the bear, if that's what it was between me and the outhouse. With the incredible illumination of the Milky Way, I could see the campground clearly all the way to the tree line. There was nothing out there. I could feel something watching me. It was like feeling an insect crawl along the back of my neck. There was no logical way for me to know something had its eyes on me, but out there in the dark, in the middle of nowhere, all alone, I couldn't dismiss it. Still on high alert, I crept along and tried not to crunch the gravel under my feet too loudly. The outhouse was still my best bet. The door was propped open by a stone, but inside there was a heavy-duty bolt lock. I would have to spend the night surrounded by the smell of not only horse, but also human poop. But I figured that was a fair trade for not getting mauled or eaten. My hand was on the latch when I heard the awful crunch of footsteps in gravel behind me. I kicked the stone, propping the door open out of the way, and slammed the heavy metal door shut, no longer caring how much noise I made. Whatever was on the other side had thumbs. Something tugged on the door as I struggled to bolt it shut. I won, but it was close. There was a metal mesh along the top of the structure for ventilation. Through it, I heard the bellows of heavy breathing that matched my own. My phone was back in my tent because I am an idiot. There was no way to tell time. The same stupid impulse that brought me out there in the first place kicked in. I had to know. Hello? Silence. Maybe they hadn't heard me, and then, hello? I could have soiled myself. I was in the right place for it. The voice was feminine, like my own, and the sound of it was a kick to the gut. I couldn't even tell you why it made me so uneasy. The sensation was like when you're walking upstairs and you're expecting another step, but your foot comes down on empty space. I'm sorry, I thought I was alone, I said. I'm alone. Every syllable was jarring. I'm sorry, I freaked out. I didn't think there was anyone else here. Sorry, I'm here. You'd think now that I knew it was another camper, I would have opened the door, but I never did. Some deeply buried instinct kept me from taking my hand off the bolt. You scared the crap out of me. Are there more tent sites out in the trees or something? I'm something. There are more. Her words made me sick to my stomach. Again, I couldn't have even told you why, only that they did. From her odd syntax, I guessed English wasn't her first language. Do you need to go? Use the bathroom, I mean, because I'm going to be in here a while. That wasn't a lie. I wouldn't have opened that door if it was my own mother on the other side. You need to go. Her grasp of English was improving with every sentence. There was something weird about that. Look, I'm sorry if I scared you, but you started it by creeping around in the dark. I won't come out. Can you go somewhere else? I'll be gone in the morning, I promise. I just wanted to sleep in peace. You need to be gone. I promise you I creep in the dark. You won't be here in the morning. Fear cemented my mouth shut. The more I spoke, the more she did, and I didn't want to hear her voice anymore. I'm sure that makes me sound like a bigot or something, but I had the feeling I was feeding words to her, and the feeling was not pleasant. It felt like she was hungry for them. The same instinct that told me to keep quiet the first time kept me from running my dumb mouth off again. I was either dealing with someone who was not mentally well, or with something else entirely. There was a threat in her words, or the way she spoke them, and I had no doubt she would be able to carry out that threat. I kept my hands on the bolt while they cramped, and the first rays of sun crept sluggishly through the mesh at the top of the walls of my shelter. It wasn't until the sun was strong enough to make me sweat in my self-imposed prison that I felt brave, stupid, enough to speak again. Hello? Are you still out there? Hello? Anyone? There was no answer, which was the best outcome I could hope for. I opened the door. My tent was untouched, at least from a distance. The oppressive feeling of being watched had dissipated. I dressed and broke down camp in record time. My moped cranked to life, but it wasn't until I went to put my helmet on that I saw the footprint. I'd kicked that rock pretty far. It was close to my bike. Naturally, I went over to it. I had to know. In a clear outline of fresh mud, there was a single print on the smooth gray of the stone. Not human, but a hoof, like that of an unshod horse or goat. It was so fresh, so vivid. It hadn't been there last night when I used the bathroom before I'd gone to bed. In the soft mud in front of the outhouse door were more of the same, some of them on top of my own boot prints. If you want to go looking for whatever the heck it was, be my guest. Just be careful with your words out there, because I figured out what was wrong with that voice when I watched the playback of my travelogue video. It was my own. Update. I have the name of the camp. Swamp Wells Horse Camp. It's hella farther out than I thought it was, south of Portland even. Sorry for my crappy memory. About 5 years ago, I lived downtown in a major city in the United States. I've always been a night person, so I would often find myself bored after my roommate, who was decidedly not a night person, went to sleep. To pass the time, I used to go for long walks and spend the time thinking. I spent 4 years like that, walking alone at night, and never once had a reason to feel afraid. I always used to joke with my roommate that even the drug dealers in the city were polite. But all of that changed in just a few minutes of one evening. It was a Wednesday, somewhere between 1 and 2 in the morning, and I was walking near a police-patrolled park quite a ways from my apartment. It was a quiet night, even for a weeknight, with very little traffic and almost no one on foot. The park, as it was most nights, was completely empty. I turned down a short side street in order to loop back to my apartment when I first noticed him. At the far end of the street, on my side, was the silhouette of a man dancing. It was a strange dance, similar to a waltz, but he finished each box with an odd forward stride. I guess you could say he was dance walking, headed straight for me. Deciding he was probably drunk, I stepped as close as I could to the road to give him the majority of the sidewalk to pass me by. The closer he got, the more I realized how gracefully he was moving. He was very tall and lanky and wearing an old suit. He danced closer still until I could make out his face. His eyes were open wide and wild, head tilted back slightly, looking off at the sky. His mouth was formed in a painfully wide cartoon of a smile. Between the eyes and the smile, I decided to cross the street before he danced any closer. I took my eyes off of him to cross the empty street. As I reached the other side, I glanced back and then stopped dead in my tracks. He had stopped dancing and was standing with one foot in the street, perfectly parallel to me. He was facing me but still looking skyward, smile still wide on his lips. I was completely and utterly unnerved by this. I started walking again, but kept my eyes on the man. He didn't move. Once I had put about half a block between us, I turned away from him for a moment to watch the sidewalk in front of me. The street and sidewalk ahead of me were completely empty. Still unnerved, I looked back to where he had been standing to find him gone. For the briefest of moments, I felt relieved until I noticed him. He had crossed the street and was now slightly crouched down. I couldn't tell for sure due to the distance and the shadows, but I was certain he was facing me. I had looked away from him for no more than 10 seconds, so it was clear that he had moved fast. I was so shocked that I stood there for some time staring at him, and then he started moving toward me again. He took giant, exaggerated, tiptoed steps, as if he were a cartoon character sneaking up on someone. Except he was moving very, very quickly. I'd like to say at this point I ran away or pulled out my pepper spray or my cell phone or anything at all, but I didn't. I just stood there, completely frozen as the smiling man crept toward me, and then he stopped again, about a car length away from me. Still smiling his smile, still looking to the sky. When I finally found my voice, I blurted out the first thing that came to mind. What I meant to ask was, "What the hell do you want?" in an angry, commanding tone. What came out was a whimper. What the Regardless of whether or not humans can smell fear, they can certainly hear it. I heard it in my own voice, and that only made me more afraid. But he didn't react to it at all. He just stood there, smiling. And then, after what felt like forever, he turned around very slowly and started dance walking away, just like that. Not wanting to turn my back to him again, I just watched him go until he was far enough away to almost be out of sight. And then I realized something. He wasn't moving away anymore, nor was he dancing. I watched in horror as the distant shape of him grew larger and larger. He was coming back my way. And this time he was running. I ran too. I ran until I was off of the side road and back onto a better lit road with sparse traffic. Looking behind me then, he was nowhere to be found. The rest of the way home, I kept glancing over my shoulder, always expecting to see his stupid smile, but he was never there. I lived in that city for 6 months after that night, and I never went out for another walk. There was something about his face that always haunted me. He didn't look drunk, he didn't look high. He looked completely and utterly insane, and that's a very, very scary thing to see. A story to scare my son. "Son, we need to have a chat about internet safety." I slowly crumpled down onto the floor next to him. His laptop was open, and he was playing Minecraft on a public server. His eyes were locked into the action. Comments scrolled down the side of the screen in a chat box. "Son, can you stop your game for a minute?" He exited the world, closed the laptop, and looked up at me. "Dad, is this going to be another cheesy, scary story?" "What?" I faked hurt feelings for a second and then grinned at him. "I thought you liked my cautionary tales." He grew up listening to my stories about children who encountered witches, ghosts, werewolves, and trolls. Like many generations of parents, I use scary stories to reinforce morals and teach lessons about safety. Single dads like me should use all the parenting tools at their disposal. He scrunched his face a little. They were fine when I was 6. But now that I'm getting older, they don't scare me anymore. They seem kind of silly. If you are going to tell a story about the internet, can you make it really, really scary? I squinted at him incredulously. He folded his arms. Dad, I'm 10 and I can handle it. Okay, I'll try. I began. Once upon a time, there was a boy named Colby. His expression indicated that he wasn't impressed with the terror of the introduction. He sighed deeply and settled in for one of Dad's cheesy stories. I continued. Colby went online and joined several children's websites. After a while, he started talking to other kids in-game and on the message boards. He made friends with another 10-year-old boy named Helper23. They liked the same video games and shows. They laughed at each other's jokes. They explored new games together. After several months of friendship, Colby gave Helper23 6 diamonds in a game they were playing. This was a very generous gift. Colby's birthday was coming up, and Helper23 wanted to send him a cool present in real life. Colby figured it wouldn't hurt to give Helper23 his home address, as long as he promised not to tell it to any strangers or grown-ups. Helper23 swore he wouldn't tell anyone else, not even his own parents, and set about mailing the package. I paused the story and asked my son, "Do you think that was a good idea?" "No," he said, shaking his head vigorously. In spite of himself, he was getting into the story. Well, neither did Colby. Colby felt guilty about giving away his home address, and his guilt began to grow and grow. By the time he put on his pajamas the next night, his guilt and fear were larger than anything else in his life. He resolved to admit the truth to his parents. The punishment would be steep, but it was worth it to have a clear conscience. He squirmed in his bed as he waited for his parents to tuck him in. My son knew the scary part was coming up. In spite of his tough talk, he leaned forward wide-eyed. I spoke quietly and deliberately. He heard all the noises of the house. The washing machine bounced around in the laundry room. Branches scraped against the brick outside his room. His baby brother cooed in the nursery. And there were some other noises he couldn't quite pinpoint. Finally, his dad's footsteps echoed down the hall. "Hey, Dad," he called out nervously. "I have something to tell you." His dad stuck his head in the doorway at a weird angle. In the darkness, his mouth didn't seem to move and the eyes were all wrong. "Yes, son." The voice was way off, too. "Are you okay, Dad?" the boy asked. "Uh-huh," sung the father in his strangely affected voice. Colby pulled his covers up defensively. Is Mom around?" "Here I am." Mom's head popped into the doorway below Dad's. Her voice was an unnatural falsetto. "Were you about to tell us that you gave our home address to Helper23? You shouldn't have done that. We told you never to give out personal information on the internet," she continued. "He wasn't really a kid. He just pretended to be one. Do you know what he did? He came to our house, broke in, and murdered both of us, just so he could spend some time with you." A fat man in a wet jacket emerged in the child's doorway holding the 2 severed heads. Colby shrieked and gasped as the man dropped the heads on the ground, unsheathed his knife, and moved into the room to work on the boy. My son screamed too. He twisted his hands defensively over his face. But we were just getting started with the story. After several hours, the boy was almost dead, and his screams had become whimpers. The killer noticed the wailing of a baby in another room and removed his knife from Colby. This was a special treat. He had never murdered a baby before and was excited about the prospect. Helper23 left Colby to die and followed the cries through the house like a homing beacon. In the nursery, he walked to the crib, picked the baby up, and held it in his arms. He moved towards the changing table to get a better look, but as he held the baby, the crying died down. The baby looked up and smiled. Helper23 had never held a baby, but he gently bounced it in his arms like a pro. He wiped his bloody hands on the blanket so he could stroke the baby's cheek. "Hey there, sweet little guy." The beautiful rage of sadism melted into something warmer and softer. He walked out of the nursery, took the baby home, named him William, and raised him as his very own. After I finished the story, my son was visibly shaken. Between ragged staccato breaths, he stammered, "But Dad, my name's William." I gave him a classic dad wink and tousled his hair. "Of course it is, son." William ran up the stairs to his bedroom in a fury of sobs. But deep down, I think he liked the story. As a kid, I was scared of pretty much everything. At night, I'd see faces moving in the wallpaper. I'd see branches slither like snakes. Piles of clothes turned to slumped bodies, lamps looked like heads, and the front of cars grinned at me with sinister intent. I could also hear them. A creaking door would sound like a groan, the wind would scream, and floorboards would breathe heavy sighs. To me, there were ghouls, ghosts, and monsters around every corner. Needless to say, I was a nervous kid. Turns out it wasn't just an active imagination. I have a condition. It basically boils down to chronic, overactive pareidolia. You know that thing where you can see faces in cars or shapes of people in trees? That's pareidolia. It is a sort of defense mechanism that humans have evolved to notice camouflaged creatures like jaguars and snakes, and to discern the sounds of encroaching predators. But to me, it is about 16 times more noticeable than what is normal for the average person. I see things everywhere, all the time. Of course, there were treatments. By age 12, I had tried 6 different regimens over a total of 4 years, and the side effects were brutal. Some would make me irritable, while others would make me hyper-focused. One type of medication just straight up put me to sleep. By age 18, I thought I'd never get a job. I was barely dragging myself through school, and there was no way I'd make it through college. I was on a course of drugs that barely kept me together, but they gave me these awful tics. I'd drop things, I'd wake up in the middle of the night, my leg would shoot out and trip me. I was a mess. My mom had to cover the stairs and handrail in grip tape. A few years ago, I had a standing meeting with the county employment services every Thursday. I hated it. On a particularly bad day, my mom had to drive me there. The meds were beating me down. She dropped me off at the end of the street, and just in that short walk to the office, I almost tripped into a brick wall. I was so flustered I knocked over a trash can. But for the first time in a couple of years, I had an interview with a potential employer. I didn't think much of her. She was just some old woman in a warm coat. She introduced herself as Teresa and told me that she'd heard a lot about me. She offered me a trial and a hefty one-time payment. I didn't get a clear idea about what I was supposed to do, but she told me that secrecy was part of it. The only demand she had was that I stop taking my meds. Still feeling the trash smell on my pants, I took Teresa up on her offer. On my first day of work, I had no idea what to expect. I'd been off my meds for a week, and I had barely slept. It was hard to wrap my head around the world as I'd seen it as a kid. I'd see faces in the walls, in the shadows, in the leaves, in patterns, pretty much everywhere. I'd hear voices and screams in every braking car, in crinkling paper, in creaking floors. It was hard staying focused, and I was so jumpy I could barely move without flinching. Teresa picked me up in a gray sedan. She was wearing a headset and kept looking over at the GPS. I noticed her leg was twitching and that she kept biting her lip. She barely looked at me that whole ride. We finally arrived at a small yard, about a 40-minute drive off the highway. There were 2 large trailers and a single-story, run-down prefab house from the 60s, one of those things with cheap wood panels and matching broken windows. There were 8 other vehicles in the yard, 4 sedans, 2 vans, a Jeep, and a bus. They'd set up warning tape, a command tent with laptops and an antenna, spotlights, and half a dozen crates covered with blue tarps. There were armed men with assault rifles, security personnel with handcuffs, and a couple of medics standing by with first aid kits and stretchers. I was swarmed as soon as I stepped out of the car. They fitted me with a headset, protective gloves, a heart monitor, and tagged me with a plastic ribbon around my left wrist. All the while, Teresa was just looking around, a bead of sweat stinging her eye. "What are we looking at?" she asked. 3, 4? "Just one," I heard in the headset. "We got it early. You got the spot?" "On site," she responded. "Any blues?" "No blues. We're clear." Teresa finally turned to me. She faced me, put her hands on my shoulders, and talked slowly. "This seems like a lot," she said. "All I want you to do is to go inside carefully and tell me what you see." "Why?" I asked. "What's in there?" "I don't know," she sighed. "None of us knows. But we think you can see it." "Is it dangerous?" She shook her head. We don't know. We're trying to get to know them. There was a flurry of instructions. I had to sign a waiver. They took pictures of me from 6 different angles and took several blood samples. They took a swab from my tongue, checked my eyes, and fitted me with a pair of safety goggles. Teresa took them from me just seconds later. Nothing around the eyes, she said. You need to see clearly. They asked me to approach the door while they were running some kind of diagnostic. Weapon checks, system checks, ready checks. It felt like we were launching a rocket. I could feel my legs shaking. I'm with you all the way, Teresa said over the headset. You can leave at any time. Just tell me what you see, and I really mean what you see. A countdown began. At 0, the spotlights turned on, and the entire yard turned into a soundless ghost town. Everyone held their breaths. It was my turn. I stepped inside. A simple 1-story house. 3 rooms, a bathroom, a kitchen. Someone had clearly lived there until recently. There were still clothes flung over a chair in the living room. The power was off, but the pale spotlights coming in through the windows made it feel like I was walking through a hospital waiting room. My heart was pounding out of my chest. I didn't know what to expect, but this payday could be the boost I needed to get my own place. A paycheck with 4 zeros for a single day of work. But standing there, looking into the sterile living room, I was having doubts. What do you see, see? Asked Teresa. Notice anything? No, just furniture. A couch, an old TV, a fancy carpet. Nothing out of the ordinary. I just walked around, saying out loud what I was seeing. As the minutes passed, Teresa was getting impatient. These are just things, she said. I need you to tell me what you really see. I entered the bathroom and immediately felt this awful feeling in the pit of my stomach. A noise tickled my ear. Looking in the bathroom mirror, I could see something moving behind me. In a heartbeat, I caught a glimpse of a pair of blue eyes. I turned around, screaming, Something moved! I flung myself backwards, closing the bathroom door with the tip of my fingers. I stumbled, tearing down the shower curtains and crushing a cockroach. Lying there with my feet in the air, I tried to remember to breathe. Rarely have I ever been so scared that I had to remind myself to breathe. My fingers tingled with adrenaline. Tell me what you saw, Teresa yelled. What's in there? Blue eyes. It had blue eyes. Did you see where it went? I didn't. To the best of my knowledge, it was still outside the door. Look again, she continued. Look again, then get out. She had to coax me out of the bathtub. She encouraged me, spurred me on, and reminded me that I had to leave that room one way or the other. It probably took them 15 minutes to get me out of the tub, and when they did, I could barely feel my feet. When I finally opened the bathroom door, I couldn't see anyone. The hallway was empty. I carefully stepped out, looking around. Nothing. Standing in the middle of the living room, I felt like an idiot. This was exactly what I was taking my medication for, paranoia and sudden bouts of fear. It dawned on me that maybe I was influenced by all the people outside and their preparations. I was walking in here expecting to see something. They'd worked me up, so of course I was seeing things. But then again, there was an odd painting on the wall that I hadn't paid attention to earlier. It was the strangest thing. It was a sort of thrift store painting, showing 2 women walking across a bridge on a hot summer's day. It was sort of generic, but I'd been hyper-vigilant when I first stepped in. You know that feeling when you say a word over and over so many times that it starts sounding like a noise? That's the feeling that fell over my eyes. The picture started to blur and disappear, turning into swirling colors. And there, in that blur, I saw those blue eyes. There were small blue spots in the water, on the sides of the bridge in the painting. That's what I'd seen, and there, I'd seen a face. Something blending into my sight, disappearing. And for a second, I knew for certain that I hadn't seen this painting when I first stepped inside. And now, it knew that I could see it. I felt it. I slowly started to back out. There's something in the painting, I whispered. In the living room. You sure? Teresa asked. Absolutely sure? Absolutely. Get out. I rounded the corner and heard the floorboards creak. I could no longer see the painting, and I could sense something move. Backing out of the front door and into the cool autumn air, I could feel hands on my shoulder. Armed men pulled me back, and paramedics started to check my eyes with flashlights. They asked me all sorts of personal questions, like my name, my mother's maiden name, and the name of the president. I was told to lie down as I heard a team breach the house with stun guns, cattle prods, nets, and a crate. Lying there and feeling the pressure subside, I just cried and laughed. I didn't even notice Teresa sitting down next to me. I was given a cold drink and a pill, and I took it without question. "You did good," she said. "You're done, you're done." "What was that? What's in there?" "Something only a special mind can see." That was my first time working with Teresa. Over the coming years, I would be called in about once or twice a month, and the pay I got from those few days was enough to get me out of my parents' house. Teresa would check in with me weekly, and I had to submit to regular checkups. But more often than not, I was completely off the leash. I started to learn a bit more about the company I was working for and what they were doing. I started getting payments from Hatchet Biotechnica, a subsidiary of Hatchet Pharmaceuticals. My official title was contractor, a title that was repeated like a name. Teresa started going into greater details on what to look for and how to act, but that first mission was a sort of test to prove myself. I had no idea what I was actually proving, but it felt like my tendency to discern patterns and seeing dangers helped me along. I learned a bit more about their procedures. For example, they were adamant about checking for blues. This meant surveying the nearby area to look for some kind of infection, usually taking the form of miscolored flowers. Most often blue, but not always. Sometimes tulips, most often sunflowers. Once they just found a bunch of teeth sticking out of the wall. Whenever they checked for blues, this is what they would look for, something overtly strange and unnatural. When something like this was found, the whole mission would be called off, and they would use controlled explosives to just take out the entire area. In more populated areas, they'd set up tents and use flamethrowers. I remember once, the week before Christmas, when 6 men with flamethrowers were called in to burn down a greenhouse. I'll never forget the way the flames reflected off their visors. To them, it all just looked like flames. But I saw something else. I saw bodies writhing in the flames. I heard screams in the shattered glass. And in the charred remains of melted plastic, I'd see pained faces glaring at me with hateful black eyes. Up until a few months ago, I had worked a total of 33 cases over 2.5 years. Every case, I'd step into a location and look for 1 to 3 things hiding in plain sight. Up until that point, I still had no idea what they actually were. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of something running past me or see a pair of blue eyes looking at me from across the room. Every time I just reported it and left. A chair, a fridge, a suspicious window. Heck, once it was a music box. This time we were just coming up to a house. It was a rainy autumn evening and the area was already set up when we got there. I saw a "for sale" sign knocked over by one of the Jeeps, which had taken a wide turn. I got suited up. Blood samples, plastic wrap, all that jazz. It was set up to be just another job. Although I was still nervous, I was getting better. "No blues?" asked Teresa. "None," said one of the armed men. "We're looking at a single tango." "You sure?" Teresa squinted. "First report said 6. Secondary reading says 1. We might have runners." "Notify the Galapagos," she sighed. "Put him on the hunt." She turned to me with a smile, tapping me on the shoulder. "In and out, you got this." "I got this," I repeated. "Yeah." Standard routine, countdown, spotlights, game on. It felt like stepping onto a stage. As I walked through the door and saw my shadow stretch out across the floor, I felt like a hunter, that I was the one to fear, and that whatever stayed in this house tried to hide for good reason. "The floor is crooked," I noted. "Strange place." "You sure?" "Yeah," I nodded. "Definitely." I steadied myself and started checking the rooms one by one. I waited for that feeling to emerge, my eyes seeing through the obvious and seeing the picture beneath the picture. The blue eyes emerging from nothing and the patterns of shadowy figures growing clearer. Just relaxing and expecting that feeling to wash over me was enough to put me at ease, but I could still feel a primal part of me tickling my nerves, expecting me to panic. But nothing happened. I checked the kitchen, the living room, the bedroom. There was nothing. Just a strangely crooked floor, empty rooms, and the echo of my own footsteps. An empty guest bedroom with a single window. Through it, I imagined scowling faces in the trees outside. 20 minutes passed and I got nothing. I reported to Teresa and she assured me we were still getting readings from inside the house. Something was still in there with me, but I hadn't seen anything. I went through cycles of denial, fear, and anger, over and over. What was I missing? Finally, I just sat down in the middle of the living room floor. I scratched my eyes, sighed, and tried to relax. Teresa, I'm not feeling it. Are you sure? There was no response. Teresa? Yeah, she responded, absent-mindedly. Yeah, no, we're good. Hold on for a minute. We're good? I asked. What do you mean we're good? Again, no response. I stomped around for another 10 minutes before I went up to a window facing the front yard. It was hard to see through the glare of the spotlight. Teresa, I'm coming out. The place is empty. As soon as I opened the front door, I saw 24 faces fixed on me. Maybe they were surprised to see me, but I got the sense that there was something else. I could tell something was off. They all looked at me with strange expressions, some neutral, some smiling ear to ear. One of the paramedics just stared at me with slack-jawed terror. It was as if they didn't know what to feel or how to express it. A hole sunk through my stomach. I got that hollow feeling as my eyes glazed over, like I was staring at something false, something hiding a pattern. This was the sense I'd been looking for inside, and now I was feeling it. In the far back, I saw Teresa. She stepped out from behind a Jeep, smiling ear to ear. Behind the shape of her face, her eyes emerged, glowing with a cold blue. One by one, their eyes flared up in a blue glow, and there, in a moment, my paranoid sight registered human-like shapes in the grass around them. Headless, mauled bodies, imposters, lookalikes, mimics, nightmare beings having tricked us into a trap. One by one, smiles started creeping across their faces, rows of impossibly sharp teeth hiding long tongues, their fingers growing longer, their necks elongating. They were losing their disguises and facing me, head-on, unafraid. Nothing was said out loud, not a word. But to me, it was as if the wind itself was screaming for me to run. I slammed the door behind me and ran. Faces were coming out of the walls, door handles turning into hands, grasping at my clothes. My distorted face reflecting in windows and mirrors with jawless grins. I couldn't blink. Every heartbeat, a new horror, forced my eyes open. There were more doors than I remembered. There were more windows than there should be. The kitchen suddenly had a skylight, and there were 4 fridges. Countless paintings had appeared in the master bedroom, depicting cruel and blood-drenched horrors. They were already here, trying to surround me, and my mind was racing to remember what was real and what wasn't. Rushing to the back of the guest bedroom, I remembered there being only 1 window. Now there were 2. I had to roll the dice. Take a guess. Do something. As I grabbed the window frame, I imagined teeth slamming into my hands, tongues licking across my palms, wide smiles sating their hunger. But this time, it was just my imagination. I burst through the window and took off running into the woods. Through the night, I just kept going. My chest hurt from holding the screams in. Without my medication, everything in the dark looked like something reaching for me, trying to eat me, trying to grab me. Creaking branches sounded like laughter, and howling winds were screams. I must have run for hours when my foot got caught between 2 rocks. As I tumbled to the ground, twisting my ankle, I saw them descend on me. I felt their fingers scratching me. I writhed on the ground, screaming for them to just let me go, to just please, please let me go. But after a few seconds, I realized I had just scratched myself on the underbrush. There was no one there. I was safe. I broke down crying, trying to ignore the twisted face reflecting off the full moon above. Eventually, I made my way home. There were no messages waiting for me. All my work numbers had been taken offline. All ways to contact them were just gone, and there was no info on the firm that hired me. Hatchet Biotechnica exists only on paper. There's no location, no contact info, and no names attached. It's all a front. I haven't heard from Teresa since. I think that whoever I've been working for have just assumed I'm dead. That's why I decided to share this anonymously. Those who know who I am can reach out to me. And for those who don't, I just have a word of warning. Be observant. Trust your intuition. It might save your life.